The sound of 50-year-old vintage Shalimar gurgling down a bathroom drain sounds exactly like a heart breaking. If you listen closely enough, I stood in the doorway of the master bathroom, my hands trembling slightly at my sides, watching Monica tilt the crystal flagon upside down. The golden liquid, the very last bottle my wife, Elena, had saved for special occasions. The only thing that still made this cold, empty house smell like she was holding me, spiraled into the porcelain sink and vanished. The scent hit me instantly. Vanilla, iris, and the ghost of the woman I buried 11 months ago. It's practically rancid, Elias, Monica said, shaking the last few drops out with a look of pure disgust. She didn't even look at me. She was too busy wiping the glass counter with a disinfectant wipe, erasing the ring where the bottle had stood for 30 years. The whole house smells like a mausoleum. My mother is allergic to dust and old people smells. My son, Julian, stood behind her, leaning against the doorframe, checking his phone. He didn't look at me either. Just let her do it, Dad. We need to sanitize the room before her parents get here. We can't have them sneezing all week. Monica tossed the empty crystal bottle into the trash can. It landed with a heavy, final thud. Then, she turned to me, wiped her hands on a towel, and slapped a glossy trifold brochure onto the wet vanity. Sunset Pines Senior Living. Experience the twilight of your life in comfort. My parents and sister are moving into the master suite on Tuesday, Monica said, her voice bright and sharp, like a knife cutting through a cake. It's better this way. You'll be happier with people your own speed. The movers are coming for your things tomorrow at 8 a.m. The room went silent. The smell of Elena's perfume was still heavy in the air, warring with the chemical sting of Monica's disinfectant. I looked at the brochure. I looked at my son, who refused to meet my eyes. Then, I looked at the empty spot on the vanity. They expected me to beg. They expected the lonely, grieving widower to cry about fairness or plead for his home. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the same calm I used to feel right before I signed the liquidation papers for a bankrupt company. I smoothed my cardigan, looked Monica dead in the eye, and smiled. A genuine, polite smile. "You're right, Monica," I said softly. "It is time to clear the air." I turned on my heel and walked out of the bathroom before either of them could respond. I didn't slam the door. I didn't stomp my feet. I simply disengaged. In my line of work, you never let the opposing counsel see you sweat, and you certainly never let them see you bleed. As I walked down the hallway of the house I had purchased in 1988, the house where I had raised Julian, where I had nursed Elena through 3 rounds of chemo, where every floorboard knew the weight of my footsteps, I realized just how much ground I had already lost. The hallway walls, once lined with warm, framed photographs of family vacations, graduation days, and Elena's prize winning garden, were now bare. Monica had taken them down 2 days ago, claiming she needed to patch and paint the walls a neutral shade of greige. The photos were currently sitting in a cardboard box in the garage, labeled Elias's junk. I passed the guest room, or what used to be the guest room. The door was open, and I saw stacks of new, unopened boxes, high thread count sheets, a massive television, and a collection of ugly, modern sculptures. This was for her parents. The invasion wasn't just planned. It was already staged. My son, Julian, caught up to me near the stairs. He grabbed my elbow, not gently, but not violently either. It was the grip of a man who was annoyed, not concerned. "Dad, wait," he hissed, keeping his voice low so Monica wouldn't hear him from the bathroom. "Don't be difficult about this. Sunset Pines is a luxury facility. Costs $6 grand a month. We're paying for it out of the estate funds. You'll have meals cooked for you. Activities, nurses?" I stopped and looked at his hand on my arm. It was the same hand I had held when he was 5 years old and terrified of the dark. It was the same hand I had shaken when he graduated from business school, full of promise and integrity. Now, his fingernails were manicured. His watch was too expensive for his salary, and his palm was sweaty. "The estate funds," I repeated, my voice level. "You mean your mother's life insurance?" Julian flinched. He pulled his hand back as if I were hot to the touch. It's family money, Dad, and we need the space. Monica's parents are helping us with the down payment on the vacation property, and they need a place to stay while their condo is renovated. It's just logistics. You're rattling around in this big place alone. It's depressing. Depressing, I echoed. Is that what Monica calls it? It's what it is, Julian snapped, his guilt transforming instantly into anger. That's the thing about weak men. They always get angry when you hold a mirror up to them. Look, the movers are coming at 8 a.m. Just have your boxes ready. Please, don't make a scene in front of the in-laws. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and marched back toward the master bedroom, back to his wife, back to the woman who had slowly, methodically stripped the spine right out of his back. That I continued to my study at the end of the hall. This was the only room in the house Monica hadn't conquered yet. She called it the cave. She hated the smell of my pipe tobacco, even though I hadn't smoked in 10 years. She hated the dark mahogany bookshelves, the heavy leather armchair, and the antique globe. She said it looked like a dead man's office. She was right. It was a dead man's office. The man I used to be, Elias Thorne, the liquidator, had died the day Elena took her last breath. Or so I thought. That I stepped inside and locked the door behind me. The click of the heavy brass deadbolt was the most satisfying sound I had heard in months. That I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard. The winter frost had killed most of the hydrangeas, but the structure of Elena's garden was still there. I saw the stakes where she grew her tomatoes. I saw the stone bench where we used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. Monica had mentioned last week that she wanted to tear it all up. A pool, she had said. A heated infinity pool. Who has time to weed a garden? I closed the blinds. For 40 years, I worked for a firm that specialized in corporate dissolution. My job wasn't to save companies. It was to bury them. When a business was rotting from the inside, bad management, embezzlement, toxic culture, they called me. I was the one who walked in, smiled politely, audited the books, identified the assets, and then systematically dismantled the organization piece by piece. That I knew how to spot a failing entity. I knew the signs of insolvency, and as I stood in the dim light of my study, I finally admitted the truth I had been avoiding for 11 months. My family was insolvent. The moral capital was gone. The assets of love and respect had been sold off to pay for Monica's vanity. That it was time to liquidate. I sat down at my massive oak desk. I didn't reach for a packing box. I didn't reach for the brochure for Sunset Pines. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver key. I had carried this key on my ring for 5 years, ever since Elena's first diagnosis. She had given it to me on a Tuesday, completely out of the blue. We had been sitting in the living room, and she had handed it to me with a look of fierce intensity that I rarely saw in her gentle eyes. "Elias," she had said, gripping my hand, "you are a brilliant man. You can take apart a Fortune 500 company in a week. But when it comes to family, you have a blind spot. You love too hard. You forgive too easily." "I don't know what you mean," I had argued. "You do," she whispered. "Monica is a wolf, Elias. And Julian is a sheep who thinks he's a shepherd. If I go first, they will come for you. They will come for the house. They will come for everything we built." I had tried to hush her, but she pressed the key into my palm. "This is for the bottom drawer of your desk. The false bottom. Do not open it unless they cross the line. You'll know the line when you see it. Promise me." I had promised, and then I had forgotten. Grief does that to you. It puts a fog over the details of the past. I had spent the last 11 months trying to be a good father-in-law, trying to accommodate Monica, trying to bond with Julian. I had ignored the insults. I had ignored the changes to the house. I had ignored the way they spent my money. But today, they poured Elena's Shalimar down the sink. That was the line that I inserted the silver key into the hidden lock mechanism under the lip of the center drawer. It turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. The false bottom popped up a fraction of an inch. My heart hammered against my ribs. I lifted the wood panel. Inside, resting on the velvet lining, was a thick, black leather portfolio. It wasn't dusty. It looked like it had been placed there yesterday. On top of the portfolio was a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Elena's elegant, looping script. To my darling liquidator. My throat tightened. I picked up the envelope. It still smelled faintly of her. Not the perfume Monica had destroyed, but the scent of her hands, lotion and paper. I opened the envelope. There was a single sheet of stationery inside. My dearest Elias, if you are reading this, I am gone. And if you have opened this drawer, it means Monica has finally done something unforgivable. I'm sorry I was right. I wanted to be wrong. You always told me that in your line of work, the most dangerous weapon isn't a lawsuit, it's the fine print. You taught me that. So I wrote some fine print of my own. Inside this portfolio is the Guardian Trust. I set it up 3 years ago with Mr. Sterling. You didn't know about it because you would have said it was too harsh. You would have said we need to trust Julian. But I knew. The house isn't yours, Elias, and it certainly isn't theirs. Read the documents, wipe your tears, and then do what you do best. Take them apart. Love, Elena. I stared at the letter for a long time. A single tear escaped my eye and landed on the paper, blurring the word love. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The sadness was still there, vast and deep as the ocean, but something else was rising to the surface now. A cold, hard resolve. I wasn't a feeble old man being sent to a nursing home. I was Elias Thorne, and I had just been authorized to begin the liquidation process. I opened the black leather portfolio. The first document was titled, Revocable Living Trust, Asset Protection and Conduct Clauses. I began to read, and as I read, a smile touched my lips. Not the polite, fake smile I had given Monica in the bathroom, but a real one. A dangerous one. Monica wanted to play house. She wanted to move her parents in. She wanted to erase my wife. She had no idea that she was currently standing in a property she had legally forfeited the moment she poured that perfume down the drain. I checked my watch. 7:45 p.m. I had 12 hours until the movers arrived. That was plenty of time to prepare the battlefield. The sun rose at 6:45 a.m., casting a pale, gray light over the frost-covered lawn. I hadn't slept. I had spent the entire night memorizing the 42 pages of the Guardian Trust. I knew every clause. I knew every stipulation. And most importantly, I knew the trigger conditions for what Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, had called the nuclear option. Clause 14, Section B. Gross mismanagement of assets, verbal abuse, or unauthorized habitation by non-beneficiaries. I closed the leather portfolio and slid it into my briefcase, along with the digital voice recorder I had used during my liquidation days. It was old, but it still worked perfectly. I slipped it into the pocket of my cardigan, clicked the record button, and walked out into the kitchen. The invasion began at 7:15 a.m. 45 minutes before the movers were scheduled to arrive. I was standing by the coffee pot, watching the steam rise from my mug, when a massive, white Range Rover pulled into the driveway. It didn't park. It conquered the pavement, taking up 2 spots and blocking my sedan. Doors slammed. Voices, loud and abrasive, shattered the morning quiet. God, look at those shutters. A male voice boomed. Rotting. Absolute rot. We'll have to rip the whole facade off. And the color? A woman's voice replied, sharp and nasally. It's so. 1990s. We need to paint it charcoal. Something modern. Monica's parents, Howard and Joyce. I had met them only a handful of times. Howard was a retired car dealership owner who spoke in declarative sentences and believed volume was a substitute for intelligence. Joyce was a woman who had had so much work done on her face that her expression was permanently stuck in a look of surprised judgment. The front door burst open. Monica didn't even knock. She just unlocked it and ushered them in like she was giving a tour of a museum she had just purchased. Come in, Monica chirped, wearing a silk robe that I recognized as one of the gifts I had given Elena for our 30th anniversary. She had dug it out of the donation pile. Ignore the mess. The movers will be here soon to clear out the debris. I stood by the counter, sipping my coffee. I was the debris. Howard marched into the kitchen, wearing a camel hair coat and driving gloves. He looked at me, then looked through me. So this is it? Howard said, slapping his hand on the granite island. My granite island. Good bones. Needs gutting, though. Kitchen is too small. We can knock out that wall. Extend into the dining room. Hi, Howard, I said evenly. Good morning, Joyce. Joyce peered at me over her designer sunglasses. Oh, Elias, you're still here. Monica said you'd be packed. Just finishing my coffee, I said, forcing a weak, apologetic smile. I hunched my shoulders slightly, playing the part of the defeated old man. I didn't realize you were coming so early. We wanted to measure for the pool before the contractors get booked up, Howard grunted, already pulling a laser tape measure from his pocket. Monica says there's a rose garden in the back that's just taking up space. We're going to pave it, put in a heated saltwater lap pool. My grip on the mug tightened until my knuckles turned white. Elena's rose garden. She had spent 20 years cultivating those grand florists. Her ashes were scattered in the soil beneath the white trellis that I looked at. Julian.my son was standing by the refrigerator, trying to make himself invisible. He knew exactly what that garden meant. He knew his mother had spent her final months sitting on that bench, watching the petals fall. Julian, I said softly. That he looked up, his eyes darting nervously between me and his father-in-law. They're talking about paving the garden, I said. The rose garden. Julian swallowed hard. He looked at Monica, who was busy showing Joyce the pantry. He looked at Howard, who was aiming his laser pointer at the ceiling. It's a big yard, Dad, Julian mumbled, looking at his shoes. It's high maintenance. Monica's mom has bad knees. She can't be weeding. It's a garden. Julian, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Your mother's garden. It's just dirt, Elias. Howard boomed, interrupting us. Progress, man. You have to move with the times. You can't live in the past. That's why you're going to Sunset Pines, right? Assisted living is for the best. You need supervision. He laughed, a loud, barking sound that I looked at Julian one last time. I gave him a chance, a literal 5-second window to be a man, to say, no, Howard, show some respect. That was my mother's pride and joy. Julian picked up a banana from the fruit bowl and peeled it, turning his back to me. That was the moment, the final seal on the warrant, that I finished my coffee and set the mug in the sink. You're right, Howard, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. I'm just an old man in the way. I'll go get my things. Good man, Howard said, dismissing me with a wave of his gloved hand. Make sure you don't leave any junk behind. We want a clean slate. Oh, don't worry, I said, touching the pocket with the voice recorder to make sure it was still running. I intend to leave this house exactly as it should be. I walked out of the kitchen, past the dining room where Joyce was already criticizing the chandelier, and headed toward the front door. Where are you going? Monica called out sharply. The movers are here in 10 minutes. I have a doctor's appointment, I lied smoothly. Check up before the transition. I'll be back by noon to sign the final papers. Make sure you are. Monica snapped. I don't want to be waiting around all day. I stepped out into the cold morning air. My sedan looked small next to Howard's Range Rover. I got in, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. As I pulled away, I saw Howard in the backyard through the side gate. He was standing in the middle of the rose bed, stomping down the frozen bushes to get a better line of sight for his measurements. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt cold, hard precision. I wasn't going to the doctor. I was going to downtown Chicago, to the offices of Sterling, Holt and Associates. The wolf pack had moved into the den, but they had forgotten to check if the traps were still active. The offices of Sterling, Holt and Associates were located in a pre-war limestone building in the financial district, the kind with heavy revolving doors and a lobby that smelled of brass polish and old money. I hadn't set foot in this building in 3 years. The last time I was here, Elena was with me. We had come to update our wills, or so I thought. I remembered she had asked me to go get the car while she finalized a few signatures with Arthur Sterling. I had waited in the idling sedan for 20 minutes, tapping the steering wheel, oblivious to the fact that upstairs, My wife was constructing a legal fortress to protect me from her own son that I took the elevator to the 14th floor. When the doors slid open, the receptionist didn't ask for my name. She simply nodded, picked up her phone, and whispered, "He's here." A moment later, the double oak doors at the end of the hall swung open. Arthur Sterling was 75 years old, a man who wore three-piece suits even on casual Fridays and believed that a handshake was more binding than a PDF. He was one of the most ruthless estate attorneys in Chicago, a man who had successfully argued cases against the IRS and won. "Elias," he said, his voice like gravel grinding in a mixer. He didn't smile. He extended a hand that felt like dry parchment paper but gripped like a vice. "I've had the file on my desk since Tuesday." "Tuesday?" I asked, stepping into his office. "The day your daughter-in-law called to inquire about the title transfer process," Arthur said, closing the door behind us. "She wanted to know if she could add her name to the deed before the probate period was officially closed. I told her I would look into it." I felt a cold flash of anger in my chest. Monica hadn't just waited until I was out. She had been trying to erase me while I was still sleeping in the master bedroom. "She's moving her parents in," I said, sitting in the leather client chair. "They're measuring the garden for a pool." Arthur walked behind his massive desk, a chaotic landscape of manila folders and legal pads, and sat down. He steepled his fingers and looked at me over the rim of his spectacles. "And Julian? Julian is peeling bananas while they insult his mother," I said. Arthur nodded slowly. "Then it's time." He reached for a thick, red accordion file that was sitting alone on the center of his blotter. It was labeled, "The Thorne Family Trust, Contingency B." "Elena was a remarkable woman, Elias," Arthur said softly, his hand resting on the file. "She knew you better than you know yourself. She knew that if she died first, you would try to keep the peace. You would let them walk all over you because you think that's what supporting your son looks like. She told me, 'Arthur, Elias is a liquidator in business but a pacifist in the home. I need you to be his sword when he refuses to pick one up.'" He opened the file. "The house?" Arthur began, pulling out a deed with a blue ribbon stamped into the corner. "Does not belong to you, and it certainly doesn't belong to Julian." I leaned forward. "I paid for it. The mortgage was paid off in 2005. Technically, yes, but 3 years ago, Elena transferred the title into the Thorne Preservation Trust. You are the primary beneficiary. Julian is a conditional secondary beneficiary." "Conditional? It means his inheritance of the property is subject to a behavior clause," Arthur said, sliding a document across the desk. "Clause 4, subsection C, the beneficiary, Julian Thorne, shall forfeit all rights to the property and any financial assets within the trust if he or his spouse engages in acts of constructive eviction or malicious destruction of personal property against the primary beneficiary, Elias Thorne." My eyes scanned the dense legal text. Elena had thought of everything. She had defined constructive eviction to include pressure to relocate to a care facility without medical necessity. She had practically transcribed Monica's brochure for Sunset Pines 3 years before Monica ever picked it up. "It gets better," Arthur said, a dry, predatory smile finally touching his lips. He pulled out another sheet. "The liquidation protocol." This was Elena's little joke. She used your own terminology. "What does it do?" "If the conditions of abuse are met," Arthur explained, tapping the paper, "the trust activates a clause that immediately terminates Julian's tenancy at will. It converts his status from family member to trespasser. It also freezes the stipend account. That's the fund paying for his car, his credit cards, and that ridiculous country club membership Monica loves so much." I sat back, stunned. The weight of it was overwhelming. Elena hadn't just left me money. She had left me a weapon. She had realized that my love for Julian was my greatest weakness. So she had taken the choice out of my hands. "But surely," I said, playing devil's advocate, "we have to prove it. There's my word against theirs. Monica will say I agreed to move. She'll say the perfume." I paused, realizing I hadn't told him about the perfume. She destroyed Elena's vintage Shalimar this morning, poured it down the sink. Arthur's face darkened. That falls under malicious destruction of memorial assets. But you're right, we need proof. Do you have anything documented? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital voice recorder. I recorded the conversation in the kitchen this morning. I said, Monica's parents discussing gutting the house. Monica demanding I leave. Julian refusing to intervene. Arthur held out his hand. I gave him the device that he pressed play. The tinny sound of Howard's voice filled the quiet office. Old man in the way. It's just dirt. Elias, you need supervision. Then Monica's voice. I don't want to be waiting around all day. Arthur listened to the whole thing, his expression unmoving, like a judge listening to a confession. When the recording ended, he clicked it off and set it gently on top of the file. That, Arthur said, is a slam dunk. In the eyes of the trust, they have just evicted themselves. He opened a drawer and pulled out a heavy fountain pen. He uncapped it and turned the document toward me. This is the authorization of enforcement, he said. Once you sign this, the trust creates a new legal entity. I will have a forensic accountant freeze the stipend accounts within the hour. I will draft the notice to vacate, and I will arrange for the sheriff's department to be on standby for a civil standby escort. I looked at the pen. Civil standby? To ensure the trespassers leave the premises without damaging any more assets, Arthur said clinically. We can have it done by tonight. I picked up the pen. The weight of it felt familiar. It felt like the pens I used to use to sign the dissolution papers for bankrupt tech startups and failing retail chains. I thought about the perfume going down the drain. I thought about the Sunset Pines brochure. I thought about Julian peeling that banana while his father was being humiliated. Arthur, I said, I don't want the sheriff there tonight. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Elias, these people are volatile. Monica will not go quietly. I know, I said, but I need one more thing. The outline mentioned a fake surrender. I need them to think they've won. I need them to sign something. Sign what? A waiver, I said, my mind racing, calculating the angles just like I used to in the boardroom. If they think I'm voluntarily handing over the management of the estate, they'll sign anything. I want them to sign a document acknowledging that they are taking full responsibility for the property, as is. It will make their eviction absolute. No loopholes about misunderstanding the terms. Arthur smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. You want to bait the trap. I want to liquidate them. I corrected. I want to do this properly. Tonight, I'm going to go home. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to tell them they're right. And then, when they are drunk on champagne and victory, that's when we execute the protocol. Arthur pulled a fresh legal pad toward him and started writing furiously. I can draft a transfer of stewardship agreement. It's legally meaningless compared to the trust, but it will serve as an admission of their intent to occupy. It cements the timeline of their hostile takeover. Good, I said. And the stipend accounts? I'll set the kill switch for 8 p.m. tonight, Arthur said, checking his watch. The moment they try to pay for anything after dinner, the cards will decline. I signed the authorization of enforcement. The ink flowed black and permanent onto the page. Elias Thorne, trustee. One more thing, Arthur said, reaching into the very back of the file. He pulled out a small, sealed envelope. Elena told me to give you this only after you sign the papers. She said it was for your performance. I took the envelope. It was labeled, for the actor. I opened it. Inside was a single index card with Elena's handwriting. Smile, Elias. The wolves only bite when they smell fear. When they smell surrender, they start to eat. Let them eat. And then close the jaws. I tucked the card into my pocket, right next to the voice recorder. Prepare the team, Arthur, I said, standing up and buttoning my cardigan. I want the locksmith, the accountant, and the sheriff's deputies at my door at 8 p.m. sharp. Not a minute sooner. They'll be there, Arthur promised. Go home, Elias. Put on a show. I walked out of the office and back into the elevator. As I descended to the street, I caught my reflection in the polished brass doors that I didn't look like a grieving widower anymore. I looked like a man who was about to close the biggest deal of his life. The surrender began now. I pulled my sedan into the driveway at 12:15 p.m. The white Range Rover was still there, dominating the space, a gleaming monument to everything I was about to dismantle. I turned off the ignition and sat in the silence for a moment. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked tired, the skin beneath them bruised with exhaustion. Good, that would help sell the lie. I adjusted my cardigan, making sure it hung a little loosely on my frame, enhancing the image of the shrinking, defeated patriarch. In my briefcase, I had the transfer of stewardship agreement Arthur had drafted. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored bond paper, looking every bit like a capitulation. In reality, it was a confession. By signing it, Monica and Julian would legally acknowledge they were taking full possessory control of the property effectively immediately. An act that, under the terms of the trust one had just activated, constituted a hostile breach. That I took a deep breath. This was the most important negotiation of my life. And like any good negotiation, it required the other party to believe they had already won. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was different. In just 4 hours, the atmosphere had shifted from a home to a construction site. There were paint swatches taped to the hallway walls, garish shades of urban slate and midnight charcoal. The rug in the foyer, a Persian silk runner Elena had bought in Istanbul, was rolled up and shoved into a corner. I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a loud, uninhibited sound. The sound of people who feel entirely comfortable in a space they haven't paid for. I walked in. They were sitting around the kitchen island eating takeout sushi. Monica was perched on a stool, chopsticks in hand, laughing at something her mother, Joyce, was saying. Howard was leaning back, picking his teeth. Julian was pouring wine. My wine, a 2014 Cabernet I had been saving, into stemless glasses. The laughter died instantly when they saw me. "You're back," Monica said. She didn't say it with relief. She said it with annoyance, as if a waiter had returned to a table to correct an order. "You said noon. It's 1:15. Traffic," I murmured, keeping my voice low and raspy. I walked into the room slowly, letting my feet drag just a fraction. I looked at the sushi containers spread out on the granite. "I see you've made yourselves at home." "Well, we couldn't wait forever, Elias," Joyce chimed in, popping a piece of tuna into her mouth. "Howard is diabetic. He needs to eat on a schedule." "Of course," I said. "I apologize." I set my briefcase on the counter, right next to a puddle of soy sauce. I looked at Julian. He was holding the wine bottle, his face flushed. He couldn't quite meet my gaze. "Dad," he said, his voice thick. Do you want a roll? There's spicy tuna left." "No, thank you, son," I said gently. "I'm not hungry." I looked around the room, letting my eyes linger on the paint swatches, the rolled-up rubs, the brochure for Sunset Pines that was still sitting on the counter where Monica had left it. I went to the doctor. I lied. And then, I went for a drive. I drove past the cemetery. To see her, the room went quiet. Mentioning Elena was usually a conversation stopper. But today I needed to weaponize her memory. "And," Monica asked, her tone sharp, "did she tell you to stop being stubborn?" I looked at Monica. I looked at her with a softness that I didn't feel. I let my shoulders slump. I let a sad, resigned smile touch my lips. "Actually," I said. "She did." Monica's eyebrows shot up. Julian straightened his posture. "I realized something out there," I continued, my voice trembling slightly. "I've been holding on too tight. This house, it's too much for me. The stairs, the maintenance, the memories. It's a mausoleum, just like you said, Monica. I've been selfish keeping it all to myself when you and Julian are trying to build a future." I saw the tension drain out of Monica's shoulders. A gleam of triumph lit up her eyes. It was predatory and raw. "Well," she said, setting down her chopsticks, "I'm glad you finally see reason, Elias. It really is for the best. Sunset Pines is lovely. You'll have people to play cards with. Yes, I said. I suppose I will. I opened my briefcase. The click of the latches was loud in the quiet kitchen. I pulled out the document Arthur had prepared. I stopped by my lawyer's office on the way back. I said, I wanted to make this official. I don't want to drag this out. I don't want any ambiguity. I slid the document across the counter toward them. What is this? Howard asked, leaning forward and squinting at the paper. It's a transfer of stewardship, I explained. It officially designates Julian and Monica as the primary managers of the estate, effective immediately. It gives you full authority to make renovations, move in family members, and handle the accounts. It basically says that, as of today, this is your house, and I am just a guest until I move to the facility. Monica snatched the paper. Her eyes scanned it hungrily. She wasn't reading the clauses. She was looking for keywords like authority and control. This allows us to start the renovations immediately? She asked. Like, tomorrow? Today if you want, I said. Once you sign that, I can't stop you. I'm legally handing over the keys. Monica looked at Julian. A wide, victorious grin spread across her face. See? She said to him. I told you he just needed a push. He knows it's the right thing to do. Julian looked at the paper, then at me. Dad, are you sure? This seems fast. I'm tired, Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I'm very tired. I just want to rest. I want to know that the house is in family hands. Please, sign it so I can stop worrying. It was the perfect bait. I appealed to his desire to escape guilt. If I wanted this, then he wasn't the bad guy for taking it. Okay, Julian said, exhaling a long breath. Okay, Dad. Monica grabbed a pen from her purse before he could change his mind. She signed her name with a flourish, the pen scratching loud and hard against the paper. Then she shoved it toward Julian. He signed it too, his hands shaky but legible. Howard and Joyce even signed as witnesses. I watched the ink dry. I watched them sign their own eviction notices. There, Monica said, slapping the document back onto the counter. Done. So when are you leaving? Tomorrow morning? Yes, I said, picking up the document and placing it carefully back into my briefcase. The movers are rescheduled for 8 a.m., but I paused. I looked at them with a hopeful, almost pathetic expression. Since this is my last night in the house, I said, and since we are all family, I was hoping we could have a dinner, proper handover dinner, to celebrate your new home. Monica hesitated. She clearly just wanted me to disappear into my room. But she had won. She had the house. She had the paper. She could afford to be gracious to the defeated. Fine, she sighed, but nothing complicated. We're tired. I have a few bottles of the 82 Bordeaux in the cellar, I said, and I can order from that French bistro you like. My treat. One last toast to the future. At the mention of the expensive wine, Howard's eyes lit up. The 82? Now you're talking, Elias. That's a $3,000 bottle. It's meant to be shared, I said. I'll decant it at 7 o'clock. We can eat at 8:00? 8:00 works, Monica said, hopping off the stool. Come on, Mom. Let's go pick out the tile for the master bath. I want to order it tonight. Wonderful, I said. They scattered like cockroaches when the light is turned off, bustling with energy and greed. Monica and Joyce went upstairs to measure the bathroom. Howard went back out to the garden to stomp on more roses. Julian remained in the kitchen. He stood there for a moment, looking at me. Dad, he started. I'll come visit you. At the home, every Sunday. I looked at my son. I saw the weakness in his jawline, the softness in his hands. He truly believed he was doing me a favor. He had convinced himself that stripping his father of his dignity was an act of love. We'll see, Julian, I said softly. Go help your wife. She needs you. He nodded, relieved to be dismissed, and hurried upstairs. I was alone in the kitchen. I walked over to the sink where, just hours ago, Elena's perfume had been destroyed. I could still smell the faint, ghostly trace of vanilla and iris, lingering beneath the scent of soy sauce and disinfectant. I checked my watch. 1:30 p.m. I had 6.5 hours until the curtain rose on the final act. I spent the afternoon in my study, packing. In reality, I was organizing the evidence. I made copies of the audio recording. I scanned the signed transfer of stewardship and emailed it to Arthur Sterling, receiving a confirmation reply 3 minutes later. Received. Sheriff dispatched for 2000 hours. Good luck, Elias. I moved slowly, methodically. I packed a small bag with my actual essentials. A change of clothes, my toiletries, a photo of Elena. Not because I was leaving, but because I wanted the visual prop. I wanted a suitcase standing by the door when they came down for dinner as the sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. The house filled with the sounds of their occupation. I heard the rip of carpet being pulled up in the hallway. I heard furniture being dragged. I heard them claiming my life, inch by inch. At 6:30 p.m. I went down to the wine cellar. I selected the 1982 Bordeaux. It was indeed a magnificent wine. I had bought a case of it the year Julian was born, planning to drink it at his wedding. We had drunk one bottle then. It had tasted like hoke. Tonight, I uncorked 2 bottles. I poured the dark, ruby liquid into a crystal decanter. I watched it breathe. This wine would taste like justice. I carried the decanter and 5 glasses upstairs to the dining room. I set the table. I used Elena's best china, the Wedgwood pattern with the delicate gold rim. I polished the silverware until it gleamed. I placed a single, white candle in the center of the table at 7:55 p.m. I stood at the head of the table, waiting. The house was warm. The smell of the roasted duck I had ordered filled the air. I heard them coming down the stairs. They were laughing again, flush with the excitement of their renovation plans. They were dressed for dinner. Monica in a cocktail dress that was a little too tight, Julian in a blazer, Howard and Joyce in their expensive, flashy casual wear. They walked into the dining room. They saw the table. They saw the wine. They saw me, standing there like a butler in my own home. "Wow," Howard said, rubbing his hands together. "You really went all out, Elias." "Please," I said, gesturing to the chairs. "Sit." They took their seats. Monica sat at the foot of the table, opposite me. Julian sat to my right. Her parents took the left. I remained standing. "Before we eat," I said, lifting the decanter, "I would like to pour the wine, and I would like to propose a toast. To the new house," Joyce chirped, holding up her glass. "To the future," Monica corrected, smiling at me. A smile that said, "I won." I poured the wine. The liquid swirled in the glasses, dark and rich. I poured for Howard. I poured for Joyce. I poured for Monica. I poured for Julian. And finally, I poured for myself. I set the decanter down. I checked my watch. 7:59 p.m. "To the future," I agreed, raising my glass. "And to everyone getting exactly what they deserve." They clinked their glasses. They drank. And then the doorbell rang. "It's likely the delivery," I said, placing my napkin calmly on the table. I ordered the duck à l'orange. It wouldn't be a celebration without a feast. Monica rolled her eyes, her hands still clutching the stem of the crystal wine glass. "Well, hurry up then. I'm starving." I walked to the front door, retrieved the heavy paper bags from the courier, and tipped him $20. As I closed the door, I took a deep breath of the cold night air. It was sharp and cleansing. I checked my watch. 8:05 p.m. The Team Arthur's cleanup crew was parked down the street. We had agreed on a specific signal. I would text Arthur a single word when the targets were seated and vulnerable. "Enjoy the meal," I thought. "It's the most expensive one you'll ever have." I returned to the dining room and served the food. For the next 40 minutes, the only sounds were the clatter of silverware against Elena's wedding china and the slurping of wine. They ate with the voracious appetite of people who believed they had finally reached the top of the food chain. Howard gnawed on a duck leg, grease shining on his chin. "You know, Elias," he said, waving the bone at me, "this room has terrible feng shui. The energy is stagnant, dead. It's the wallpaper, Joyce added, wrinkling her nose at the hand-painted floral silk that Elena had imported from France. It's so grandmotherly. We need to rip it all down, put up some shiplap, open the space up. We're gutted the whole floor next week. Mom, Monica said, pouring herself a third glass of the 1982 Bordeaux. She didn't even appreciate the vintage. She was drinking it like it was water. I've already called the dumpster company. They're bringing a 30-yard bin on Thursday. We're tossing everything. The furniture, the curtains, those creepy oil paintings. I stiffened. The paintings? I asked, my voice soft. Elena painted those. Exactly. Monica laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. They're depressing. No offense, Elias, but your wife had a very gloomy aesthetic. We want this house to be a place of joy, a place for living people. I looked at Julian. He was focused intently on his plate, cutting his meat into tiny, precise squares. He heard her. He heard his wife call his mother's art creepy and gloomy. He heard them planning to throw his childhood home into a dumpster. Julian, I said. He stopped chewing but didn't look up. Your mother spent 3 years painting that landscape over the fireplace, I said, pointing to the canvas. She finished it the week before she started chemo. She said it was the place she wanted to go when she got better. Dad, please, Julian sighed, finally raising his eyes. They were glassy with wine and irritation. Don't start with the guilt trips. Not tonight. We're trying to have a nice family dinner. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, son, I said, leaning forward slightly. I'm trying to see if you're still in there. The table went silent. Howard stopped chewing. Joyce lowered her fork. Excuse me? Monica snapped. I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on my son. This was it. The final test. The clause of redemption, as I called it in my head. If he stood up now, if he told Monica to stop, if he defended his mother's memory, I wouldn't stop the liquidation, but I might spare him the worst of the fallout. Julian, I asked, my voice steady and quiet, are you sure this is what you want? To erase her? To let them tear down the garden she planted? To throw her art in a dumpster? Julian looked at Monica. She glared at him, a silent threat in her eyes. Sighed with him, and you sleep on the couch. He looked at Howard, the wealthy father-in-law he was desperate to impress. Then he looked at me. Dad, Julian said, his voice cold and flat. Mom is gone. You're holding on to ghosts. It's unhealthy. Monica is right. It's time to move on. Stop being dramatic and just let us live our lives. He picked up his wine glass and drained it. Eat your soup. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a verdict being read. My son had made his choice. He had chosen the wolf pack. He had chosen comfort over character. Okay, I said softly. I picked up my napkin and dabbed my mouth. I felt a strange sense of relief. The hesitation was gone. The last thread of paternal obligation had just been severed. You're right, Julian, I said, reaching into my pocket. It is time to move on. I pulled out my phone. Under the table, I opened the text thread with Arthur Sterling. I typed a single word. Now I put the phone back in my pocket and stood up. Where are you going? Monica asked, annoyed. We haven't had dessert. I have to get the door, I said. The door? Howard grunted. No one rang the doorbell. I smiled. A genuine, terrifying smile. They will, I said. And 1 second later, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a polite chime. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding that rattled the stained glass in the entryway. Bam, bam, bam. Who on earth is that at this hour? Joyce gasped, clutching her pearls. Probably the neighbors complaining about the noise. Monica sneered. I'll handle it. No, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a whip. Sit down, Monica. She froze, shocked by the sudden command in my tone. The old man mask had slipped. The liquidator was standing at the head of the table. I'll get it, I said. I believe it's for you. I turned and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard the scraping of chairs and confused murmurs. I walked to the front door. Through the frosted glass, I could see the flashing blue lights of two sheriff's cruisers reflecting off the snow. I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. Arthur Sterling stood there in a trench coat, flanked by two uniformed deputies, a man with a locksmith's kit and a woman holding a clipboard. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his breath visible in the cold air. "Are we ready to proceed?" "We are," I said, stepping aside. "The trespassers are in the dining room." I led the procession back into the dining room. It felt less like a dinner party and more like a tribunal. The scene that awaited us was almost comical in its grotesque indulgence. Howard was picking his teeth with a fingernail. Joyce was holding her wine glass up to the light, critiquing the clarity. Monica was scrolling through her phone, likely looking at tile samples. Julian was staring into his empty soup bowl, looking like a man trying to disappear. When I stepped in, followed by Arthur Sterling, two uniformed sheriff's deputies, a locksmith with a heavy tool belt, and a forensic accountant holding a laptop, the air in the room changed instantly. It went from warm and greasy to sharp and cold. Monica looked up. Her eyes went wide, darting from the sheriff's badge to Arthur's trench coat. "What is this?" she demanded, standing up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. "Elias, why are there police in our dining room?" "Sit down, Mrs. Thorne," Arthur said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 50 years of courtroom battles. It was a voice that didn't ask for permission. "I will not sit down," Monica snapped, her face flushing red. "This is my house. Who are you?" "I am Arthur Sterling," he replied, placing his briefcase on the sideboard, right next to the gravy boat. "I am the executor of the Elena Thorne Preservation Trust. And you are incorrect. This is not your house." Howard stood up now, wiping grease from his chin with a linen napkin. "Now hold on a minute. We signed the papers today. Elias transferred the stewardship. We have the document." "Ah, yes," Arthur said, clicking open his briefcase. "The transfer of stewardship. A fascinating document. Thank you for signing it so promptly. It made my job significantly easier." "What do you mean?" Julian asked, finally looking up. His voice was shaky. "Dad, what's going on?" I moved to the head of the table, but I didn't sit. I stood behind my chair, resting my hands on the back of it. I looked at my son. "I gave you a chance, Julian," I said softly. 10 minutes ago, I asked you if you wanted to erase your mother. I asked you if you were sure." "Stop speaking in riddles," Monica screamed. "Officers, remove these people. My father-in-law is clearly confused. He's moving to a facility tomorrow. He's having an episode." One of the deputies stepped forward. He was a large man with a face like carved granite. He didn't look at me. He looked at Monica. "Ma'am, we are here to execute a civil standby for an immediate eviction," the deputy said. "We have a court order signed by Judge Holloway less than an hour ago." "Eviction?" Monica laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched sound. "For him? You can't evict him. He's leaving voluntarily." "No, ma'am," the deputy said, handing her a sheaf of papers. "For you." The room went deadly silent. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Monica grabbed the documents. Her eyes scanned the page, her face draining of color until she looked like a wax figure. This says I'm a trespasser," she whispered. "This says, malicious occupation?" "Let me explain," Arthur interjected, smoothing his tie. He pulled a file from his briefcase, the red accordion file. "The property you are standing in is owned by a trust. It is not owned by Elias. It is certainly not owned by Julian. The trust has very specific conduct clauses regarding the residency of beneficiaries." Arthur walked around the table, pacing like a shark circling a raft. "Clause 14. Arthur recited without looking at the paper. "Immediate termination of tenancy occurs upon the willful destruction of trust assets or acts of constructive eviction against the primary beneficiary." "We didn't destroy anything," Howard bellowed, trying to regain control. We're renovating, improving the value. This morning, I spoke up, my voice cutting through Howard's bluster. At 7:45 a.m., Monica poured a vintage bottle of 1972 Shalimar perfume down the master bathroom sink. Monica froze. Perfume? You're doing this because of perfume? That bottle, Arthur corrected, was cataloged as a memorial asset in the trust inventory, valued at $1,200. Its destruction was a trigger event. Furthermore, the transfer of stewardship you signed today, that wasn't a deed transfer, Monica. It was a legal admission that you intended to occupy the premises and displace the primary beneficiary, Elias, against the terms of the trust. Arthur smiled, a thin, razor-sharp expression. You confessed to a hostile takeover in writing, he said, and by signing it, you activated the liquidation protocol. Liquidation? Julian breathed. Dad, what does that mean? It means, I said, looking at my son, that the company is bankrupt, Julian, and we are selling off the parts. I nodded to the forensic accountant, a quiet man named Mr. Henderson. He stepped forward and placed his laptop on the dining table, pushing aside a bowl of untouched green beans. Mr. Thorne, the accountant said, addressing Julian. As of 8:01 p.m., the Thorne family stipend accounts have been frozen. The American Express Platinum card ending in 4098 has been canceled. The lease on the 2024 Mercedes SUV has been terminated. The repossession team is en route to your driveway now. You canceled my credit cards? Monica shrieked. I have pending orders. I have contractors coming on Monday. Canceled, the accountant confirmed, and the country club membership, and the tuition deposit for the private preschool, and the monthly allowance for household management. You can't do that, Howard shouted, slamming his fist on the table. That's their money. That's my daughter's inheritance. It's my money, I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of the liquidator. It was always my money, and Elena's money. You just spent it. I looked at Howard, and you, Howard, you were measuring my garden this morning. You wanted to pave over my wife's roses for a lap pool. Howard's face turned a mottled purple. It's just dirt. I was doing you a favor. That dirt contains the ashes of the woman who bought this house, I said. And under the preservation of sacred ground clause, any attempt to alter the landscaping without trustee approval is considered vandalism. I turned to the sheriff. Deputy, I said, I would like these trespassers removed from the property. Immediately. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal effects, the deputy announced to the room. Anything left after that will be placed on the curb. Pandemonium broke out. Joyce started crying, a wailing sound that grated on the ears. My coat. Where is my fur coat? Howard started yelling at Arthur, threatening to sue, threatening to call the mayor, threatening to destroy us all. Arthur just stood there, checking his watch, looking bored. Monica turned on Julian. She began to hit his chest with her fists. Do something, she screamed. He's your father. Fix this. Tell him to stop. Julian stood up. He looked broken. He looked like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. He walked toward me, his hands reaching out. Dad, he pleaded, please, this is insane. You can't kick us out. We have nowhere to go. Monica's parents rented out their condo. We sold our apartment. We'll be homeless. I looked at him. I remembered the boy who used to scrape his knees and run to me for a bandage. I remembered the teenager I taught to drive. But then I remembered the man who stood in the kitchen this morning and peeled a banana while his in-laws spat on his mother's memory. You have the brochure, I said. Julian blinked, confused. What? The brochure? I repeated. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the glossy trifold for Sunset Pines Senior Living that Monica had slapped on the vanity that morning. I placed it gently in Julian's hand. They have a guest suite, I said. It's very comfortable. Experience the twilight of your life in comfort. Julian stared at the brochure. His face crumbled. Dad, it was just a joke. We didn't mean it. You meant it, I said. You meant every word. You just didn't think I would survive it. But Mom, he stammered. Mom wouldn't want this. That was the wrong thing to say. I stepped closer to him. I invaded his personal space. I let him see the fire that was burning behind my calm exterior. Do not speak her name, I hissed. You sat at this table 20 minutes ago and agreed to burn her paintings. You agreed to throw her life into a dumpster. Your mother is the one who wrote these documents, Julian. She is the one who signed the eviction order. I am just the messenger. I turned my back on him. Get out, Dad. I said, get out. I roared. It was the first time I had raised my voice in 10 years. The sound echoed off the walls, shaking the crystal in the cabinet. Julian recoiled as if I had struck him. He looked at Monica, who was frantically stuffing silverware into her purse. Old habits die hard. He looked at Howard and Joyce, who were being escorted toward the door by the deputies. That he realized, finally, that he was alone. The next 10 minutes were a blur of chaotic motion. The deputies supervised as they grabbed their coats, their phones, and the few bags they had brought. Monica tried to take the centerpiece, a silver candelabra, but the accountant gently took it from her hands. That stays, he said, asset of the trust. She screamed an obscenity at him and stormed out. I stood by the window in the living room, watching them pour out onto the driveway. The snow had started to fall again, large white flakes drifting down in the darkness. I saw Howard trying to fit his massive frame into the back of Julian's sedan because his Range Rover was blocked in by the sheriff's cruiser. I saw Joyce weeping into a handkerchief. I saw Monica screaming at Julian, her face twisted in a mask of pure hate. And I saw Julian. He was standing by the trunk of his car, looking back at the house. He looked up at the window where I was standing. He raised a hand, a hesitant, pleading wave. I didn't wave back. I reached for the cord of the blinds Monica had said were outdated and needed to be replaced. I pulled the cord. The slats snapped shut, blocking him out. Behind me, I heard the distinctive whirr-zzz of a power drill. The locksmith was already at the front door. Mr. Thorne? The locksmith called out. Front door cylinder is replaced. I'm moving to the back door now. Do you want me to rekey the garage too? I turned around. The house was quiet. The toxic energy was gone, expelled into the cold night. The smell of Monica's cheap perfume was fading, replaced by the smell of old wood, floor wax, and silence. Yes, I said, rekey everything and install the deadbolts, the heavy ones. Arthur Sterling walked over to me, beheld 2 crystal glasses and the bottle of 1982 Bordeaux. He had rescued it from the table before the chaos ensued. A toast, Arthur suggested, holding out a glass. I took it. The wine was dark and heavy, like blood. To the liquidation, Arthur said. No, I corrected, looking around the room that was finally, peacefully mine again. To the restructuring. We drank. The house was empty, but for the first time in 11 months, it didn't feel lonely. It felt protected. I walked over to the fireplace. The painting above the mantel, Elena's landscape of the rolling hills, seemed to glow in the dim light. I could almost hear her voice, whispering from the brushstrokes. Good job, Elias. Good job. I sat down in my armchair at the head of the table. The food was cold. The guests were gone. The family was broken. But the roses were safe. The next 3 days were defined by a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. That it wasn't the empty, lonely silence that had haunted the house for the last 11 months. It was the clean, sterile silence of a hospital room after a successful surgery. The tumor had been removed. Now, the healing could begin. I spent the weekend supervising the restoration. I hired a team of painters, professionals, not the discount handyman Monica had lined up, to cover the urban slate test patches with the original warm cream color Elena had loved. I brought the rubs back out of the garage. I rehung the photos of our vacations, the graduations, the anniversaries. That I was putting the skin back on the bones of my life. On Monday morning, Arthur Sterling came by for coffee. He didn't bring a briefcase this time. He brought a box of donuts and a tablet. The repo men got the Mercedes yesterday, Arthur said, taking a bite of a glazed donut. Sunday afternoon. At the mall. The mall? I asked, pouring him a fresh cup. Monica was trying to return the tile samples she bought. Arthur chuckled darkly. Apparently, when the card was declined for the refund, because the account was frozen, she made a scene. While she was screaming at the manager, the tow truck hooked up the SUV in the parking lot. By the time she came out, it was gone. I took a sip of my coffee. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I just felt the cold satisfaction of a ledger balancing out. And the parents? I asked. Howard and Joyce are currently staying at a Motel 6 off the interstate, Arthur said. Their tenants in the condo have a lease until June. They can't move back in. Howard called my office 6 times this morning threatening to sue for elder abuse. I reminded him that he is only 62 and you are 68. The judge won't look kindly on that argument. And Julian, Arthur stopped chewing. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He's staying with a friend from college, sleeping on a couch. Monica apparently blamed him for the entire debacle. She told him that if he had just managed his father better, they would be swimming in a heated pool by now. I looked out the window at the garden. The roses were battered from Howard's boots, but the roots were deep. They would survive the winter. I wasn't sure if my son would. He called me. I said quietly, "Did you answer?" "No," Arthur nodded. "Good. The liquidation isn't finished until the liabilities are fully severed. If you bail him out now, Elias, you're just refinancing a bad debt." Arthur left around noon. I spent the afternoon reading in my study. The house was warm, the radiator hissing softly in the corner at 4 p.m. It started to rain. A cold, sleety rain that slapped against the windows. 4:15 p.m. A taxi pulled up to the curb. I watched through the blinds as the back door opened. Julian stepped out. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a blazer that was soaked through in seconds. He was carrying a duffel bag. He looked older than his 35 years. His posture, usually so arrogant and upright, was slumped that he paid the driver with cash. Crumpled bills he dug out of his pocket. The taxi drove away. Julian stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, looking up at the house. He looked at the window where I was standing. I knew he couldn't see me through the blinds, but he knew I was there. He walked up the driveway. He didn't walk like an owner anymore. He walked like a beggar. He rang the doorbell. I didn't move. He rang it again. Ding dong. A light, pleading sound. I waited 2 full minutes. I wanted him to feel the cold. I wanted him to feel the damp seeping into his expensive shoes. I wanted him to understand what it felt like to be left out in the elements while the people inside were warm and safe. Finally, I walked to the door. I didn't open it fully. I left the heavy brass chain engaged, opening it only 3 inches. "Dad." Julian's face appeared in the crack. He was shivering. His hair was plastered to his forehead. "Dad, please, let me in. It's freezing." "The lock has been changed, Julian," I said calmly. "And the alarm code." "I know," he stammered. "I know. Look, I just need to talk." Monica kicked me out. She said she wants a divorce. She said I'm a loser who couldn't deliver on his promises. "She sounds charming," I said, "but I believe you already knew that." "Dad, I have nowhere to go." Julian's voice cracked. "Matt's wife said I can't stay on their couch anymore. I have no cash. My cards aren't working. I haven't eaten since yesterday." I looked at my son. I saw the desperation in his eyes. A father's instinct is a powerful thing. It screams at you to open the door, to wrap them in a blanket, to fix it. But then I smelled the ghost of vanilla and iris. I remembered the sound of the perfume gurgling down the drain. I remembered the brochure. Sunset Pines. "You have a job, Julian," I said. "You're a vice president of sales." I can't access my salary account," he admitted, looking down. "It was tied to the joint account with Monica. She drained it before you froze the trust stipends. She took everything, Dad." "I have nothing. You have choices," I corrected. "You made them." I'm sorry, he shouted, slapping his hand against the doorframe. Okay? Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was weak. I let her run over you because it was easier than fighting her. I'm sorry about the perfume. I'm sorry about the garden. Just, please. I'm your son. I looked at him. I looked deep into the eyes that used to look just like Elena's. You are my son, I agreed softly. But you are also the man who sat in my kitchen and peeled a banana while your father-in-law stomped on your mother's grave. You are the man who told me to eat my soup, while your wife planned to throw my life into a dumpster. I was scared of her. Julian cried. No, Julian, I said, my voice hardening. You weren't scared. You were greedy. You liked the lifestyle she demanded, but you wanted me to pay for it. You wanted the inheritance without the inconvenience of the ancestor. I started to close the door. Dad, wait. Julian jammed his foot in the gap. You can't leave me out here. What would Mom say? I stopped. I pushed the door back open against his shoe. Your mother? I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had suppressed for days. Is the one who wrote the eviction order Julian. She knew. She knew you would choose the wolf over the shepherd. She left me strict instructions. Instructions? He whispered. To liquidate, I said. In my line of work, when a subsidiary becomes toxic, when it starts draining the capital of the parent company, you don't bail it out. You cut it loose. You protect the core assets. I'm a subsidiary? He asked, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I'm a business decision to you? You made it a business decision when you tried to put me in a home to steal my real estate. I said, you made it a transaction. I'm just closing the deal. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I passed it through the crack in the door. Here, I said, this will get you a hot meal, maybe a bus ticket. Julian stared at the money. He didn't take it. Dad, please, take it, Julian, I commanded. It's the last disbursement from the Thorne estate. He took the bill with shaking fingers. Where am I supposed to go? He sobbed. I hear Sunset Pines has vacancies. I said, they have very comfortable guest suites. I pulled the door shut. I heard him scream, Dad, as the heavy oak slammed into the frame that I turned the deadbolt. Click. I turned the secondary lock. Thud. I stood there for a long time, listening to him crying on the porch. I listened until his footsteps finally receded down the driveway. I listened until the silence returned. I walked into the living room and sat down in front of the fireplace. I was shaking. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. It is a terrible thing to break your own child, even when it is necessary. I looked up at Elena's painting, the landscape of rolling hills and peace. I did it, Elle, I whispered to the empty room. I stopped them. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was hot and salty. I wasn't the liquidator anymore. I was just a father who had lost his son. But as I looked around the room, safe, quiet, and smelling faintly of wood smoke and old books, I knew I had saved the one thing Elena had asked me to protect: Denham dignity and the memory of us. It has been 3 months since the night of the liquidation. Spring has finally come to Chicago. The frost has melted, and the ground in the backyard has softened. I spent the morning out there with my gardening shears. Howard's heavy boots had crushed several of the rose bushes, snapping the canes near the root. At first glance, they looked dead. But Elena taught me that roses are resilient things. You just have to know how to prune them. You have to cut away the damaged parts, no matter how much it hurts to lose the growth, so the plant can focus its energy on survival. I cut them back hard. And today, I saw the first new shoots of green pushing through the soil. They will bloom again. Different, perhaps. Smaller, maybe. But they will bloom. The house is quiet, but it is no longer empty. I have filled it with new routines. I drink my coffee in the kitchen without fear of judgment. I listen to my jazz records in the living room without being told to turn them down. I have even started painting again. Terrible amateur watercolors of the garden. But they are mine. I have not heard from Monica. Arthur tells me the divorce proceedings are ugly. She is fighting for alimony. But since Julian has no assets and no job, he was let go 2 weeks after the eviction for performance issues. There is nothing for her to take. The wolves, starved of their prey, have turned on each other. As for Julian, I saw him once, about a week ago. I was coming out of the grocery store, and I saw him waiting at the bus stop across the street. He looked thinner. He was wearing a cheap coat I didn't recognize. He saw me too. He didn't wave. He didn't run over to beg. He just looked at me, gave a small, sad nod, and got on the bus. It broke my heart, of course. A father's heart never truly hardens. It just learns to endure the cracks. But in that nod, I saw something I hadn't seen in him for years. A glimmer of accountability. He is living his own life now. It is a hard life, a cold life, but it is finally his life, not one purchased with his mother's memory. Maybe one day, when he has rebuilt himself from the ground up, without my money and without her poison, he will come back to the door. And maybe on that day I will open it. But not yet. Tonight I walked into the master bathroom. The renovation damage has been repaired. The vanity is polished. I reached into the shopping bag I had brought home from the city. I pulled out the small blue box. Guerlain, Shalimar. I opened the box and took out the crystal flagon. The golden liquid caught the light, amber and beautiful. I didn't pour it down the sink. I placed it gently on the glass counter, right on the ring where the old bottle had stood for 30 years. I uncorked it for just a second. The scent filled the air instantly. Vanilla, iris, bergamot. It smelled like dignity. It smelled like a promise kept. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The tired, grieving old man was gone. In his place was a survivor, a guardian. Elena was right. Love isn't just about holding on. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go and when to fight back. I smiled at the empty room. Welcome home, Elle, I whispered. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't just smell like perfume. It smelled like peace.